89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake, West Bloomfield, Kego Harbor, Sylvan Lake. 89.3 Lakes FM. It's the Megacast, an hour-long TV and radio streaming show keeping you informed on the day-to-day news. Live from West Bloomfield, we're bringing you the news, updates, and information impacting communities around Michigan. Join our host, Tyler Kieft, as he talks with community members, business leaders, and professional experts about the stories that impact you. You're watching the Megacast on Civic Center TV.
When the temperatures are chilly, being together warms the soul. Keep the winter fun going. Help protect yourself and those around you by keeping your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
1 in 4 Michigan homes has high levels of radon, a naturally occurring radioactive gas known to cause lung cancer. It doesn't matter where you live or what type of home you have. You won't even know it's there unless you test. So don't wait. Testing is cheap and easy. And if there's a problem, it's simple to fix. Visit michigan.gov/radon to learn more.
We took action. Will you?
WB Parks and the West Bloomfield Diversity Task Force once again invite you to the 2023 Black Expo. Drop by Orchard Mall and tour demos and displays that highlight Black business owners, resources, and careers. Bring your friends and family to shop around local vendors and support their hard work and dedication to their craft. Come on down Saturday, February 25th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Orchard Mall in West Bloomfield. The 2023 Black Expo.
Hello, nose. My nose knows is when somebody uses the bathroom. Mom, Polly didn't flush. Ooh, I smell cookies.
I smell an A+.
How could my nose be running when it stays on my face?
Our noses know if those sniffles are just a cold, allergies, or COVID-19. So swab it. Test it. It's good to know.
Let's savor these moments. Made possible by the COVID-19 vaccine. Keep the dining out going by keeping yourself protected and your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
My Michigan TV is streaming everywhere on Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV, and more smart TV apps. My Michigan TV is on your phone too. Take us with you wherever you go. Just search for My Michigan TV on your favorite app store or visit mymitv.com. All Michigan, streaming everywhere. My Michigan TV.
Wondering what to say to someone who's been sexually assaulted or abused?
I believe you. I'm so sorry this happened.
It's not your fault.
Confidential and anonymous help is available at the Michigan Sexual Assault Hotline. Connect with us 24/7. Call 855-VOICES-4 or text 1-866-238-1454 for help. Learn more at michigan.gov/voices4.
It's that time of year, Greater West Bloomfield. Our towns gather together this March for the 5th annual State of the Communities. Important figures from Sylvan Lake, West Bloomfield, Orchard Lake, and Kego Harbor discuss the past year's projects and developments. Hear presentations from speakers, discussions on plans of action, and more. The 5th annual State of the Communities, March 13th at 7 p.m. at the new West Bloomfield Middle School.
You're listening to your radio homes for the Megacast, 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake and 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills. Today's edition of the Megacast begins now. Welcome to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. Today we'll be talking to a number of people about topics of interest and importance to Michiganders just like you. Let's begin with what's making headlines today on CivicCenterTV.com on our local news page as we continue our coverage and our discussion about the events of Monday, February 13th at Michigan State University. Our first article today comes from David Jesse at the Detroit Free Press. Thousands gathered at the iconic rock on the banks of the Red Cedar at Michigan State University last night to gather as a community for a night of mourning and to begin their recovery from the horror that MSU experienced on Monday night. Together. That was the theme: togetherness, friendship, giving a bit of the love in your heart to the person next to you. Among the speakers were Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a MSU alum herself, interim president Dr. Teresa Woodruff, as well as an inspiring and heartfelt speech from the president of the Associated Students of MSU, or ASMSU, Joe Kovac. And they said something really important and pointed a bit at us here in the media, but I agree wholeheartedly. Nobody owes you their story. And if it comes out, and it often comes out in times like these, that us in the media, whether it's or local news stations trying to get the story and get an understanding of what the public thinks and what the public is experiencing in their specific coverage area, or certainly the 24-hour news cycle that we experience mostly on cable news, which is a whole discussion for another day. What often ends up in situations like these is that we in the media strive so much to tell the story of the situation and provide updates that sometimes some of us forget the human element of tragedy and the human element of mourning and grief. Joe, a James Madison College student studying social relations and policy, reminded her peers that their grief is not a, quote, sideshow, end quote, for the nation, and that they, quote, don't owe anyone anything, especially not your story, end quote. They led with empathy, heart, and care, exactly what a good leader should do, and really provide a great example of what our leaders should do in the wake of this situation at Michigan State University. And as always, the ultimate father figure of MSU men's basketball coach Tom Izzo also spoke at the event. His message: get to know the people around you, meet someone new, give them a helping hand, a hug, a shoulder to cry on. Be there to listen and provide a listening ear to them as they process this tragedy as well. That's so much at the core of what being a Michigan State Spartan is about. Whether you are an active student, a member of the staff or the faculty in the athletics department, you're an alum of the university, you're a family of someone at the university, or you're just a fan of Michigan State and have inundated yourself in the culture of MSU. That really is, in my opinion, what is at the core of being a Michigan State Spartan. Is being friendly, being there for your neighbors, being willing to, be a little bit outgoing, but also provide those basic tenets of what being a friend is. Understanding that a lot of the role of being a friend is listening and being there for people when they're in their times of need, when they are experiencing things in a way that's different from you and different from the person next to you, from your friend, other friends, from your family, from your colleagues. And that is what was on display at Michigan State last night, where thousands of people gathered at the Rock and on Auditorium Road and on Farm Lane and by the Red Cedar and by at the Fairchild Auditorium. It was a packed audience of a number of people that were there for the formal portions of the vigil early on, the speeches, musical performances, and so on. But really what was at the heart of all of this was bringing Spartan Nation together. It was bringing the Michigan State community, East Lansing community, the Mid-Michigan community, the state of Michigan, and schools around the country and around the world together in a time like this, where something that happens that's so tragic and so horrifying can be something relatable to somebody, because we are in the times that we're in, because elementary, middle, and high school students are constantly going through lockdown drills or in lockdowns, or, God forbid, have experienced these sort of incidents themselves. Some of the students included at Michigan State who had experienced this in the past, just 14 and a half months ago at Oxford High School, or in the decades past. There's been a quite heavily reported story of a student on TikTok who had experienced the Sandy Hook shooting over 10 years ago as an elementary school student, now also experiencing a mass shooting at Michigan State University. And so providing that helping hand, being there for people around you, whether you know them or not, it's so much at the core of what being a Michigan State Spartan is. It always has been. It's not just in times of turmoil and tragedy like the community is experiencing right now. It's also been that way in times of great joy, whether you're at a Spartan football game or a basketball game or another event on campus, and there's some moment of joy. You're sharing it with people you never have met before, and perhaps you'll never see again or talk to again in your life. That is what it's all about, being a Spartan. And in times of turmoil and of grief and of mourning, those sort of relationships become that much more important. And what was so pointed to me from what Tom Izzo had said, what was the most important thing that he had said is, turn to the person to your right, to the person to your left, the people in front of you, shake their hand, introduce yourself, talk to them, get to know them, and ask, how can I help? That's what it's all about. Well, and even beyond it being the quintessential Spartan way, that's what this is all about anyway. Whether you are a Spartan or not, whether you know someone that is grieving in this situation or has gone through the trauma of the situation as a student, as a staff member, as a parent, as an alum, as someone that lives in East Lansing, as someone that just has a heart, that is what this is all about. Lending a helping hand to people in their time of need, being willing to listen, and we have to help each other through this. You can watch the full vigil on facebook.com/spartans.msu. Join them, ponder our world, shed a tear as students Phoenix Miranda and Jordan Anderson perform Amazing Grace, a just absolutely touching rendition at the vigil. The whole vigil and was an amazing show of empathy, courage, kindness, community. And I highly encourage that you watch on MSU's Facebook page. That was not the only vigil, the only community gathering to mourn those lost and those injured and those traumatized at Michigan State. In Ann Arbor, also thousands gathered at their iconic Diag to mourn their classmates to the west. Another show of kindness from our rivals in sports, but our friends in humanity. President Santa Ono, of course, earlier on in the week following Monday's tragedy, had ordered flags on all University of Michigan campuses to stand at half-staff until further notice, and select sports teams have announced that they will wear MSU memorial stickers on their helmets for the remainder of their seasons. And it wasn't just here in Michigan that there were tributes and a reaching of a helping hand and a friendly hand to the Michigan State community. Even across the country in North Carolina, Duke University reached out to Spartan Nation, breaking one of its iconic traditions in order to lend a helping hand and a show of a bit of kindness to their neighbors. Let's take a look at that from Duke University as they played a special song over their bell tower. a touching show of kindness and a reaching of a helping hand from another university here in the U.S. That may not have a similar experience in the back of their minds, but certainly understands what it means to be a community and to be a community that is in a time of mourning, reaching out a helping hand. This reminds me, when I saw that initially yesterday, and it popped onto my social media feed from a fellow alum, Kelly Rowe of Fox 2, who had shared it. And the first thing I thought of in watching that video was something that I don't remember specifically because I was 6 years old at the time, and I didn't see this until years down the road, just being someone that's interested in history. It reminds me of just in the following days of the attacks on September 11th, 2001, when Queen Elizabeth II had ordered at the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace that they play not the United Kingdom's national anthem, not God Save the Queen, but instead the Star-Spangled Banner of the United States national anthem, breaking a 600-year tradition at Buckingham Palace at that time that had never before that been broken, as a show of solidarity and a show of kindness to their friends and their neighbors across the sea. And that's exactly what this sort of reminded me of, because so often we think of these universities, we think of Michigan State, we think of Duke, we think of their basketball programs, of that rivalry of big-time matchups between the Spartans and the Blue Devils in the NCAA tournament in March Madness. We think about a few years ago that iconic shot by Kenny Goins that ultimately led to a Michigan State victory over Duke and Zion Williamson. You think of the battle and the debate of who's the better coach between Tom Izzo and Mike Krzyzewski, their longtime head coach at Duke University, who has since retired. And that all goes away in times like this. We put sports, we put rivalry, we put my people versus your people to the side, and just show kindness and show that we have a heart and lend our heart to other people. And that's what really drew this parallel between what happened at Duke University with their bell tower playing the MSU fight song. They also played MSU Shadows, which is the alma mater song as well, on their bell tower that morning to reach out to Spartan Nation and say, we're here for you, we see you, we understand that you're hurting, and we hurt with you, but we're here to help as well. And an absolutely touching showing of kindness from Duke University. And that's what you do for people that you care about. If that isn't kindness, then I don't know what is. Continuing on, also making headlines on our website today from Kara Berg at the Detroit News. As mourning continues at Michigan State, excuse me, the FBI and local authorities are assisting staff and students in retrieving their belongings from both the MSU Union and Berkey Hall. Daily times are set for students and for the staff as well, and the university, as well as the local and federal law enforcement, are providing therapy dogs and other assistances on site to those that may be in need of consolation as they return to these places that used to be social and gathering places of happiness and memories that will forever be hallowed ground at Michigan State University and in East Lansing going forward. And it could not have possibly been easy for any of these individuals, whether it was the law enforcement personnel that were helping collect these belongings and organize these belongings and ultimately reconnect them with their rightful owners, but also for these individuals, whether they were there or their family or their friends of these individuals that were in those buildings at that time on Monday. This could not have been an easy experience for them, especially so soon after, to retrieve their belongings, some of those which may be necessities to them, but also to return to a scene that will always be a point of trauma for these individuals too. And you got to give credit to the university and give credit to others involved in the recovery from this for having the presence of mind to provide those sorts of therapies and those sorts of consolation. Again, excuse me, as I clear my throat, I'll take a sip of water. At the MSU Union and at Berkey Hall, as individuals go back and collect what is theirs, but also ultimately are returning to a place that unfortunately will never be the same for them or for anyone else at Michigan State. And in addition to that, Michigan State University is currently working on reorganizing where classes that were regularly scheduled at Berkey Hall will be for the remainder of this semester. Finally, making headlines today on our website on civiccentertv.com on our local news page. From the Lansing State Journal's Rachel Greco, we talk about helping people in their time of need and how that is a distinct example of the Spartan way. Well, these are some rousing examples of that coming up ahead. As students left MSU following Monday's tragedy, not everyone was fortunate to have their parent pick them up or be able to drive themselves home or give someone else a ride home or pick up a ride from somebody else. But then came Spartans like Paula Racer, who helped connect one MSU student with volunteers and people who could help him get a round-trip ticket back home to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and ultimately, when he's ready, back to Michigan State. And that was just the start, as Razor and her peers helped to connect over 100 students with similar resources, giving them a gift so necessary, the comfort of going home to their families and beginning their recovery, as well as a poignant reminder, you're always at home with your fellow Spartans. That's exactly the same message being sent to the families of Guadalupe Wapila Perez, one of 5 hospitalized at this time following Monday's mass shooting. A GoFundMe was set up by her family to support her in her treatment and her recovery as she remains in Sparrow Hospital at this time. That was set up, and we spoke about this a little bit yesterday as we highlighted the victims that we know of at this time or at that time on yesterday's show. You can find that on our Megacast page on civiccentertv.com, but I digress. Guadalupe's family had set up this GoFundMe campaign to help pay for her treatment and also for her recovery, which is expected to be quite extensive according to doctors. And what was set as just a $50,000 goal, which sounds a little bit odd to say just a $50,000 goal, but that it will seem like just $50,000 when you think about where it's at right now. Just shortly before we went live today, the donations had more than exceeded that $50,000 goal, currently sitting at over $350,000 donated to Guadalupe Wapila Perez and her family from over 6,000 donors. And that is just as of this morning, just a little bit beyond 36 hours or so since this was set up. That is and counting, over just about $350,000. And what is so awesome about this is we have all these great examples of the bad in humanity. We've seen it this week. The worst of us has come out this week. It came out on Monday night. We saw the absolute horror that came from the worst side of humanity. But in times like this, as much as we think about the monsters that are out there and we fear them and we hope to never encounter them and we hope that they can be recovered or just simply go away, in times that we see the worst in people, we often also see the best in people emerge, whether it is from someone like Paula Racer and the other volunteers that were helping students get back home, even on a temporary basis, even if it's just a bus ride or an Uber drive or as expensive as a plane ticket, a round-trip ticket can be on an airline, even just a simple Detroit to Philadelphia flight or Lansing or Flint or Grand Rapids to Philly flight. That's a show of kindness that is exactly what is the best of humanity. It is those that are donating to Guadalupe Wapila Perez and her family as she is in the hospital and is fighting for her life and will be fighting for a return to some semblance of normalcy in her life, just on the basic movement and everyday function of herself as she is. That is exactly what is the good in humanity that we see in times like this. And again, goes back to what I said about that just being the Spartan way. And whether it's been us at Michigan, in the Michigan State community, those on campus, those who are related to people involved with MSU, or our neighbors in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan, in Kalamazoo, at Western Michigan, at colleges all across the U.S. I'm blanking on the name of the college, what it is exactly, but there was a college that's in northern Ohio, and it had some choral students who drove 4 hours yesterday. I saw a news report from, I believe it was Channel 7, a reporter at Channel 7 who had tweeted that these students traveled 4 hours yesterday to come to MSU to sing, to play music, to help comfort their neighbors to the north here in Michigan in their time of need. These are the examples we should be highlighting. We can talk all we want about the 43-year-old monster of a human being that perpetrated this on Monday. We want to know why. We want to understand the motive. That's, of course, going to be part of this. It's an important part of this. But what's more important is that we don't forget about the good people that are still here, that we highlight them, because that encourages others to do that. One person takes a step forward and someone else follows. One good act leads to another. Each of those dominoes falls and it creates a better world. That's what we're trying to do. Is it not? Is that not what this is all about? I mean, what are we doing otherwise? If we're not helping each other in this world, what are we doing otherwise? If we're not using whatever resources we have, whatever ounces of courage and encouragement and heart that we can give to help other people, then what are we doing? What is all this for? And that's what we're seeing from the MSU community, from communities in Michigan and across the U.S., from people all over the world, lending a helping hand and helping us all stay Spartan strong. Those are our headlines for today on our website, civiccentertv.com. Check out our local news page for links to all these. Read them in full. It's some great journalism we've also seen been outputted over the last several days, both on the night of the unfortunate events at Michigan State University and in the days following, telling people's stories, showing the good in our community, and looking into exactly how this grieving process is undergoing in East Lansing and across Michigan and across the entire world that is the Michigan State Spartan community in the wake of Monday's shooting. Great journalism has been done at all different levels, and I highly encourage you to go to our local news page, click through these articles from the Detroit Free Press, the Detroit News, Lansing State Journal, MLive, Bridge, Michigan, all these different outlets that we visit on a daily basis to give that baseline of what we're talking about on the show. And read their articles, read their supporting materials, give them the hits that they need to continue to bring in what they need in order to support that local journalism. And of course, if you have the means to do so, we highly encourage you to subscribe to these publications and support local journalism. And even beyond this, we talk about supporting other people, supporting local journalism. Linked in these articles today, we will have them on our website shortly on our local news page. You can find a link as well to the GoFundMe page that is supporting Guadalupe Wapila Perez and her family as she fights for her life in the hospital, and will ultimately have what is expected to be a quite extensive recovery and a quite expensive recovery as well. And we all can lend a helping hand to Guadalupe as well as the other victims and the families as well at this time. Those are all of our headlines. Again, civiccentertv.com on our Megacast, on our local news page. Stay tuned with us. We'll continue with more on the Megacast after this short break.
In the face of COVID-19, staying healthy is important.
And now the same is true in the face of flu.
Influenza has the power to infect millions.
But it's easy to protect yourself, your family, and your community.
The flu vaccine is safe and effective. And with COVID-19 still around,
it's essential. Together we can face flu season head on.
Visit michigan.gov/flu.
It's that time of year, Greater West Bloomfield. Our towns gather together this March for the 5th annual State of the Communities. Important figures from Sylvan Lake, West Bloomfield, Orchard Lake, and Kego Harbor discuss the past year's projects and developments. Hear presentations from speakers, discussions on plans of action, and more. The 5th annual State of the Communities, March 13th at 7 p.m. at the new West Bloomfield Middle School.
Many people are feeling overwhelmed and struggling with mental wellness these days. So be kind to your mind. Give yourself permission to breathe. Share your feelings. You are not alone. Have hope. Talk to a Stay Well counselor for free confidential help 24/7 through the COVID-19 hotline.
Ronnie started doing prescription pills at the age of 15, and by 19, he died. If your child is struggling with drug use, try not to be too proud to reach out for help. Don't be worried about what the neighbor will think or your family. Just get your child the help they need. Sometimes it's the hard road to take, but the hard road is nothing compared to living with the fact that your child is no longer with you.
There's hope and help at drugfree.org.
When you have a gambling problem, you have a money problem. Don't let your gambling cause you financial hardship. If you or someone you love is struggling with gambling, we can help. Get free confidential counseling and win your life back. Learn more at michigan.gov/problemgambling.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Keefe. You can stay up to date with us on our Megacast page, civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Find links to all of our partnering stations and find all of our full shows and each individual interview segment on demand as well. civiccentertv.com/Megacast as we continue our coverage and discussion on the tragedy at Michigan State University. 3 killed on Monday in a mass shooting at Berkey Hall and the MSU Union. 5 are currently injured and in the hospital in the Sparrow Health System in Lansing, fighting for their lives at this time. And the 43-year-old man that perpetuated this had taken his life at the end of the incident after being confronted by the local authorities just north of campus in East Lansing. So we'll continue with our coverage now. Before we go in, and there's so much that we can learn about what's happened at Michigan State, how the Michigan State community is feeling at this time. I highly encourage you to read articles in your local papers, to search for these people's individual stories. Like ASM MSU President Joe Kovac had said, nobody owes anyone their story. And so for the ones that are out there, those are people who are willing to say, I'm telling my story to help other people feel what they're feeling. And so as we continue to mourn and we continue to learn more and we have this thirst for knowledge in a situation where we just don't know why any of this has happened, it's really important to also understand those individual stories, the micro that goes with the macro of the whole situation. And so there's great articles, including one that was shared with me by another alum, a good friend of mine, Anna Davis, who I graduated with in 2017 from the Com Arts College at Michigan State. It's an article in The Atlantic, which is typically a paid subscription-based publication, but in this case, this article is free to view on their website, and it's called Requiem for the Spartans by Tim Alberta. Requiem for the Spartans, the school I love, is forever changed. Really touching article. Highly encourage you to watch it. So we've got plenty more coming up on this edition of the Megacast. We'll have Dr. Chris Smith on with us in just a little bit to talk about some of the issues that surround incidents like these, and often the conversation then shifts over to what can we do to prevent these sorts of incidents in the future. He's the board chairperson of the Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. We'll talk to him about what some of those common sense gun reforms, so to speak, or other actions that can be taken to help prevent these sorts of situations from popping up again. May not entirely eliminate them. That should also be mentioned here, that none of these reforms that are being discussed or will continue to be discussed necessarily mean that any of this will go away permanently. But if it gives us a little bit of an inkling, a little bit of a chance to potentially reduce the chances this happens again, the debate should be from there, is that not worth it? So we'll be joined by Dr. Chris Smith, board chairperson for the Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, in just a little bit here on the Megacast. Before we do that, as people continue to mourn, as you may be mourning yourself and asking, where do I even start? We want to give you a chance to take a look again at an interview we had on Tuesday morning with Dr. Melanie Schwartz from Viewpoint Psychology and Wellness in West Bloomfield about beginning that mourning process personally, about helping others through that process, as well as a little bit of an angle as well on how law enforcement and first responders that were on site may also need some help in their recovery as well. Let's take a look at parts of that interview from Tuesday's edition of the Megacast. And again, you can watch this on demand in its entirety. We won't play it in its entirety due to time constraints today. You can find this on our on-demand page as well as on our Megacast page on civiccentertv.com. Let's take a look. I appreciate you taking time to be with us today as we once again are at a point we've been at before in our communities here. Certainly we think about back in November of 2021 in the wake of the shooting at Oxford High School, and we think about even recent events with threats being made to several schools across the state of Michigan. And it's a traumatic event for anybody that's involved, whether they were at the scene of any of these shootings, sheltering in place, a parent from afar, and a first responder. So where should we start in terms of helping each other recover and begin to cope with the events of Monday night in East Lansing?
Well, I can't believe we're here again and we're having this conversation again. I feel like we were just doing this. Really, the number one predictor of people getting through trauma is community. And so making sure, and I've seen it, I saw it last night, I'm seeing it this morning, I see it on social media, I see it on the news, I see it just personally, reaching out to everyone right now. And people are offering, people in Lansing are offering, hey, if your kids don't want to be on campus, send them to my house. I'm okay with that. How are you doing? Were you affected by this? What can I do for you? And I think that is where we start, is just letting people know that you're there and that you are willing to help.
And for those on campus, for students, some who may have been affected in many different ways than others, being there for your fellow student can be a really important first step, because you are in that close proximity. You do have that shared experience with them. And so,
yes.
But it's also important for those students too to focus on their own recovery and their own coping in this situation too, because everyone's going to be affected in a different
100.
way. So for those students that want to help each other but are also going to be coping themselves, what is your advice for them on how they can manage both simultaneously, or if they should be managing both simultaneously?
They 100% should be talking to someone right now. Okay, all of the resources that are available at Michigan State right now, or a lot of students do have their own personal therapists reach out. I reached out last night to all of my clients at MSU and families who have students at MSU, and just said, I'm here for you, whatever you need. Make sure your kids are talking. I cannot stress the importance of just, even if you feel like it's not affecting you, it is, and just getting it out and talking about it is the first step in getting through all of this.
And then from a parent's perspective too, their kids were at various parts of the campus last night during the events of the shooting, from the initial shootings at Berkey Hall and at the MSU Union to throughout the reports of shootings at various places across campus, real or not, in those moments, and especially given the lockdown of the campus and all that went on last night, parents also are going to be heavily involved in this recovery too, and they need their own recovery. So for parents, what is your advice on where they should start, both in coping with their child being in harm's way potentially last night, but also helping them provide whatever resources they need or support that their kids may need to work through this step by step?
Well, I think number one, parents are going to need to talk just as much as the kids are. I mean, it was traumatic for the parents. I mean, going through it, because they didn't know if their kids were safe, or not knowing what was happening. Obviously everybody was holding on to whatever information they could get, but there was so much information going on, some true, some not, that, that increased the stress of everybody. So I think it's important for the parents also to have their community to do some research online or with the schools, or with their own resources to learn how to work with their kids who have now endured a trauma. So they need to help themselves. They also need to help their kids and be strong for their kids. Their kids are resilient. They will get through this, but it's going to be a process. And as long as they're on top of it and they are proactive about it, then everyone will get through this the way that they need to.
Peter Sagal from NPR's Wait, Don't Tell Me had a really interesting tweet that caught my eye last night. It was, quote, just sent a text to a friend in East Lansing where there's an active shooter saying, are you safe? And realized she did the same thing for me when it happened in my town in July. And we think about that from a local perspective too. Many students that were at Oxford High School in November of 2021 are now students at Michigan State. We heard stories last night of a couple of students who spoke with local news outlets from Detroit and from the Lansing area as well, who had just started at MSU in January at the beginning of the second semester of the regular proper school year, and once again are thrust back into that situation. So from a professional perspective, what is if there's a protocol or if there's a certain way that you go about addressing that from someone that already has this sort of traumatic experience and has been in recovery for that for almost 2 years at this point, a little over a year and a half at this point, and now is in a similar situation at a place where they're separated from where they were previously at their first incident?
Mm-hmm. I mean, unfortunately, we have zero control over the things that happen around us. Yeah. And hopefully in treatment and recovery of what they've already been working on, they've learned that things may happen. I mean, obviously it's a 1 in a billion chance that someone's going to endure this more than once in their lifetime. But it has happened now. And hopefully they're already in treatment, continuing in treatment, and this will just be the next step of their recovery to work on this. But, this is the time for those communities and those families to really, be around those students and really keep watch over them and do what they need to do to make sure that the recovery for those students who have unfortunately had to go through this more than once continue to work on their traumas and how to get through it.
And these situations too, we'd be remiss if we don't also think about those that responded to this tragedy. Certainly the police officers and the EMS that were on site from Michigan State University Police and Public Safety, as well as from local EMS, but also from departments that were in the immediate area and surrounding areas. I think about even my cousin who works for Livingston County EMS was also and lives in the Lansing area, was also called in to respond to this. You work with law enforcement on mental health matters and providing counseling to police officers in West Bloomfield. Speak to us about counseling for these individuals who see these sort of situations all the time. It's unfortunately in some cases par for the course in their career field, but that doesn't make that any easier each time it happens for them.
They do look at it a little differently than we do. I say to them all the time that, our witnessing of trauma versus their witnessing of trauma look different because they're more immune to it because they do see it way more frequently than we do. However, I do educate them on the importance of how it does impact them and the importance of being able to work through it. I'm hoping that the different departments that were involved last night do have their own crisis intervention that they have brought into place to work through what they went through last night. That's what crisis intervention stress management was developed for, was for that type of situation where the departments, or even for MSU now, the students will also go through crisis intervention stress management interventions right now to manage the initial crisis outcome of what's going on with them. So I'm hoping that the departments do that. Most of them are trained in it. A lot of the departments also have peer support teams to help with that as well. So that's my guess is what will happen. And then, the kind of state of the departments is changing a little bit, and many more of the police officers or first responders are reaching out for therapy services at this point as well. And so hopefully they will work with their therapist on it as well.
We're joined by Dr. Melanie Schwartz on today's edition of the Megacast. She is a licensed clinical psychologist with Viewpoint Psychology and Wellness, and also works very closely with the West Bloomfield Police Department, providing counseling services to local law enforcement and first responders in the West Bloomfield community. And Dr. Schwartz, just to go back to the general sense of counseling and addressing these sorts of situations for people across the board, it is so complicated because trauma affects people in a number of different ways. It hits people differently based on proximity, based on their past experiences, based on their natural fight or flight responses, and so many other factors. So for mental health professionals like yourself, what are you considering? What are you looking for? What are you putting together as you're planning to help individuals who have been a witness to a tragedy like this, who have been a victim of a tragedy like this, who are connected to someone who's been unfortunately involved in such a tragedy, to help them through a variety of different outcomes that can come from something like this?
Unfortunately, I feel like, at least Viewpoint, and I know probably across the board, we have all had to become trauma therapists over the last couple of years. And so we have really worked on specializing and working on our training in trauma and grief because of, these repeated incidents that continue to happen, and the more and more clients that do come in who are dealing with trauma and grief. So I would say that unfortunately it's become the norm for us in how we treat our clients, is because that's what we're dealing with. That's who's walking in the door. That's what we're seeing in the country, in the community. And so we use our skills and our interventions that we've learned and that, we work with on a daily basis at this point.
And in terms of that full interview, you can see, our apologies there for the harsh transition. That's my bad. You can see that entire interview with Dr. Melanie Schwartz, and I encourage you to do so as you're continuing your morning, beginning your morning process, helping someone else through theirs, or just trying to understand where people are coming from at this point in time following Monday's tragedy at Michigan State University. That full interview on demand on our website, civiccentertv.com/megacast, or on our YouTube page. Just search Civic Center TV 15 and go look in our videos for Dr. Melanie Schwartz from Viewpoint Psychology and Wellness. As we continue on the Megacast, talking about the situation at Michigan State University following the mass shooting on Monday night, we're joined now by someone who is directly associated with Michigan State University, a professor of criminal justice at Michigan State University, and also the board chairperson for the Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. Dr. Chris Smith joins us once again on the Megacast. Dr. Smith, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, appreciate you having you on the show, because this is a situation that you have some expertise in, the gun violence side. Unfortunately, also, there is that direct connection to Michigan State University, as this has hit directly at home at the university that you teach at as well. So for you, given that direct connection, your association with Michigan State University, and this really hitting home, how does the situation for you as an expert in this field, as someone that studies gun violence and studies the ways that gun violence is approached for prevention, for intervention, and ultimately for change in legislation down the road, how did this hit differently for you?
Well, at a very personal level, I teach in the hallway in Berkey Hall, where the first part of the shooting occurred. Had this shooter chosen a different night of the week, it could very well have been me in my classroom who were there, because I teach a class into the early evening, so you think about kind of close calls and the risks that are all around us. So on the one hand, there's that factor, and it makes me very concerned about my students, because I don't know yet anything about where they were, what their experiences were. I know that a lot of people aren't going to want to go back to Berkey Hall, and MSU is making arrangements to move classes out of there for the rest of this semester. But another part of me, also having looked at a lot of these things, also knows, why should we be immune? Why wouldn't it happen here? With 400 million guns in the hands of civilians, some of whom are responsible gun owners and some of whom are not. Basically, we are all at risk of what someone else might do. So I was shocked, but in a way also not surprised.
And in the wake of these mass shootings, we see it time and time again here in Michigan, here in other places in the United States, a place where this is uniquely a problem. These mass shootings on our school campuses and other public gathering areas, really anywhere at any time in the U.S. there can and there will be a mass shooting. And in these situations, in the immediate aftermath, the conversation almost instantly turns to legislative response, legislative preventative measures that can be taken. And in places that these have been taken, how effective have they been making some of these reforms that we hear pretty commonly, universal background checks, red flag laws, and so on, that have become sort of the buzzwords of speak at this time, thinking about legislative responses?
So, given the pervasiveness of guns throughout the country, it's very hard to think that, oh, there's going to be this law that is going to prevent this thing from happening. I think we think more in terms of the variety of gun violence problems we see. You know, the majority of deaths are from suicides. We see children acquiring firearms and other things. And so legislatively, you want to work at reducing risk and harm where you can. In this particular instance, of course, there's a little bit of a question we don't know. If Michigan had an extreme risk protection order law, otherwise known as a red flag law, where firearms could be removed temporarily from someone who was suffering from crisis or significant problems that showed evidence of potentially harming themselves or others. And I certainly don't know if that would have applied here, but that's the kind of law that in some places might make a difference. And from a social science perspective, it is hard to measure things that don't happen. So in those places that have these laws and they see some lower rate of suicide, for example, we also don't know if mass shootings were prevented, but it's certainly possible because we know of instances in some states where family members were contacting law enforcement. I think my adult child who has mental problems is going to harm people and he has all these guns, and they're in a state where law enforcement has to say to them, there's no mechanism for us to do anything until he causes harm. That's problematic. But I think we want to think about gun violence in all its different dimensions and think about what are the ways we may reduce risk and harm, even knowing that we cannot prevent all of these events, especially random shooting events, from happening.
And that goes to what's often the counterpoint from usually those in more conservative circles politically that say this isn't a gun issue, this is a mental health issue. I'm in the camp personally of it's both. It can be both, and it really should be approached from both angles. How much of a mental health side of things on the legislative side would also be helpful in conjunction to some of these potential gun reforms that we have seen in other places or be proposed in other places and certainly are expected to be proposed here and up for vote in our legislature given its Republican majority, a Democratic majority in both chambers pretty soon?
Well, the mental health argument is not irrelevant because we see some people who, you know, have clinically diagnosable things, but we see other people that go into just an emotional rage that wouldn't be, you know, diagnosable. And, you know, one way just to highlight that, if you look at other countries that do not have the rates of mass shootings that we have, they are just extraordinarily rare events. It isn't because they've solved mental health. It's because you don't have that combination of guns with mental health problems, which really affects us. But if you think in the United States, for example, we don't have universal health care. And we have, in many places, very inadequately funded and accessible mental health treatment programs. And how different might it be if we had universal health care that included mental health care? Again, we won't know unless we do it, but that's something that other countries do have and that we simply lack. So I'm all in favor of increasing our attention and resources to mental health issues and other medical issues, because I think there would be broad benefits for society. But that's not going to cure the problem because we see people who act with guns in a moment of rage that is not based on some diagnosable psychiatric condition.
We're joined on today's program by the board chairman of the Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, Dr. Chris Smith, who's also a professor of criminal justice at Michigan State University. You can find more information on the Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence at Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence.org. And going back to the academic side of things, as you mentioned, Chris, you are a professor of criminal justice. You have taught at Berkey Hall, one of your classes where this shooting did occur, and teaching students in criminal justice, whether they are aiming to be in law enforcement, or be an attorney, defense, or a prosecuting attorney. Where do you even begin coming back from this to apply what has happened right there at Michigan State University to what these students, or some of these students presumably, may be working on specifically solving after their time at Michigan State?
Well, certainly one big piece of it, as you've covered this week, is from a psychological angle of repair, recovery, and what we've just talked about with mental health issues. That's outside of my area. I'm more about law and policy and the question of how do we produce research that may be useful to tell us what kinds of policies could reduce risk and harm, what research exists, and can we overcome the collision we find on this issue and some other issues where research evidence collides with strongly held ideological beliefs about guns. So I think I'm going to tread a little bit carefully throughout the rest of the semester about this, but I think the discussions that I will have in my classes is to think about what does research evidence tell us and what kinds of things might reduce some aspects of gun violence if they would be put into law. And of course, the other element that I look at is what are the impediments to having these things become law, even when they are supported by research evidence as being something beneficial and having very modest impacts on gun ownership.
You can get involved, Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence.org, and get in on conversations like this and ultimately pushing for action across the board to prevent gun violence here in Michigan and across the board as well. Dr. Smith, before we let you go, anything else that you'd like to say today?
No, but I do appreciate people who have media platforms as you do that are trying to explore and present these issues in a very thoughtful way, because it's complex. There's a variety of dimensions about gun violence people need to think about. It's not a simple matter of trying to take people's guns away or colliding with the Second Amendment. So let me just express my gratitude to you and your colleagues around the state and the country who are looking at this in a thoughtful way to try to educate the public. Our goal is to educate the public, and you make a big contribution to this too.